Greetings, Starfighters. Yeah, no video segment for this episode, and, well, if you watched the last one, you know exactly why, so let's not dwell on that, and go straight into Columbus Day from 2008. Plot summary, courtesy of IMDb. John Cologne, by the way, I don't remember if they actually ever said his last name in the movie at any point. John Cologne has just pulled off the biggest heist of his life and is racing to get rid of the merchandise before he leaves for Florida to retire. The plans get mixed up when he meets a young boy in a downtown park who helps him realize the important things he needs to change in his life. Before he can do that, he must unload the mysterious briefcase to the same gangster he stole it from without getting killed. The quick-witted John comes up with a plan and enlists the aid of his friend Max to safely unload the merchandise. He's in a race against the clock to stay alive and make all the money he'd ever need for the rest of his life all in one afternoon. If he succeeds, he can finally rekindle his relationship with his ex-wife and become the father he's always wanted to be. Okay, so before we even talk about the movie itself, we got us both an elephant and a 900-pound gorilla in the room. First up, the title. Yes, this movie is in fact named after a national holiday dedicated to a syphilitic genocidal rapist that never even set foot on what we would consider today to be U.S. soil. And on top of that, one of the producers of this film is Kevin Spacey, a guy who's been accused of multiple sexual assaults and had 3 of his accusers wind up dead under mysterious circumstances in calendar year 2019. Yikes, doesn't even begin to cover it. So I'm not even going to try. Let's just focus on the movie at hand, which... Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say this up front. The script I have here in front of me is harsher than I actually feel now. I had a few days to think about it for various reasons, and I'm still not sure I'd recommend the movie to anybody, but it's not quite as bad as the next several minutes of me talking suggests I thought it was. I'll get into that as I go along here. I'll dip in and out of the script, which I normally do anyway, but these shows are only mostly scripted, but there's still quite a bit of ad-libbing. First up, I will be referring to Kilmer's character as Johnny. I know he's simply called John in the plot summary, but throughout most of the movie, other people refer to him as Johnny, so. Anyway, we open up with a bit of a messy action sequence, starting with Johnny shooting and wounding someone named Leonard before snagging a briefcase from him. He is about to kill Leonard until Leonard shows him a picture of his son, at which point Johnny just goes ahead and leaves him there. Then he gets jumped in the lower level of a parking garage, in a poorly lit scene that ends with Johnny, killing all 3 of his attackers, and then we have the opening credits. I could still tell what was happening during the action sequence there, just missing some context that the movie ends up giving us later, so it wasn't a confusing mess, but it also wasn't very engaging to watch. That part I actually stand by. We got us a couple of TV alums in this movie, CSI and China Beach's Mark Helgenberger and That 70s Show's Wilmer Valderrama. I'm kind of a fan of Helgenberger. Valderrama, I don't really know much outside of That 70s Show, apart from, the odd, special guest star voice cameo he's done on some animated shows. The credits themselves, rather generic, for the most part. The first half of the credit sequence is a long, unbroken take, following Johnny to a broken-down phone booth in the middle of a park. Yeah, phone booth. And this movie came out in 2008. Well, just roll with it. Now, while these long shots are certainly technically difficult to pull off, I can't really praise this one here, because in most films the long takes serve an actual purpose to the plot, or even sometimes it's just there to look cool, and that's fine. But this one doesn't really do either of those. We didn't need to see the whole walk to the phone booth. And it isn't, like I said, not that cool to look at either. I mean, compare that to any of the long shots from Children of Men, for instance. I mean, How many of those long takes served the plot is certainly debatable, but you can't deny that all of them looked amazing. The one in this movie, it just seems to be here because the director felt like having one. From the phone booth, Johnny calls up a guy named Manny, although it took me a couple of lines of dialogue to realize that his name was Manny because, unlike the other 3 movies in this set, this one didn't come with closed captioning. And it didn't come with closed captioning because... So Manny is apparently a drunk and possibly a drug addict, but was involved with whatever Johnny was doing at the start of the film. And he's handcuffed to a chunk of a metal fence. Okay, I forgot to correct this in the script. It wasn't actually a fence. They were window bars. I forgot to correct that after the flashback sequence later. No. So Manny's inside his apartment listening to music when Johnny calls. And, it does get explained later, but in the moment, man, it was so weird. This guy just randomly handcuffed to a chunk of fence. Well, what I thought at the time was fence. I mean, I actually screencapped this one because I couldn't find it on Google Images. But I mean, look at this. Imagine seeing this without context. Because that's what I was dealing with watching the movie. So moving on from this, we get Johnny calling his girlfriend on a Bluetooth headphone, telling her about having pulled off his score. This is ironic, considering that earlier in the movie he was lambasting Manny for using a cell phone to talk about the score. This does not get commented on in the film, and that is definitely a ding against it. There's some odd split-screen usage here, and it actually kind of runs throughout the movie, but here is where I first noticed it. And it doesn't really seem to need to be there, and half of it just fades out anyway. Now, this is a bad sign. I mean, odd editing and framing choices in a Val Kilmer movie. So this had me worried that this was going to be Streets of Blood all over again. The good news is it wasn't. The bad news is that even with it not being as bad as Streets of Blood, it was still distracting. At this point, the movie has spent half of its first 10 minutes in just one park in LA. It's a nice park, certainly, but, you know, this is a movie, not a tourism board video. Move on already. While still in the park, Johnny calls his ex-wife, played by Mark Helgenberger. I tend to like her in things, as I think I've mentioned before. Hopefully that holds true for this movie. They talk, and it's all character stuff that a lot of the time I tend to skip over for this show, unless it particularly grabs me for good or bad reasons. And since it didn't grab me here, I'm going to move on to minute 11, and we are still in the park. And now Johnny is leaving a message on his daughter's answering machine, and I'm starting to wonder who snuck a drama movie into this action movie set. Also, some little kid is following Johnny around for some reason. That kid is actually on 2 of the posters I saved off Google Images for this episode. That would be posters 4 and 5. Those numbers will only matter to the editor, who I can't be in the room with right now because of the human malware. Oh, fuck it. Because of COVID-19, my channel's not monetized anyway. Coronavirus. There, yes, suck it, YouTube algorithm. I wasn't making shit off this video anyway. Ha! Where was I? Alright. Anyway, after the call to his daughter, he sits down on a bench in the same park, approaching 13 minutes now, and the little kid from earlier starts talking to him, pestering him with questions. It's annoying, though the kid gets in 1 or 2 good zingers. At 14 minutes and 10 seconds, we finally leave the park. Oh, but only for a flashback. Yeah, it turns out pretty much the whole movie takes place in this one park. Yeah. Oh, Echo Park, by the way. They name it later in the film. I didn't recognize it, because even though I do live in Southern California, I pretty much never go to LA, and the last few times I was there, all I really saw was the airport, So John uses a bogus call to Manny's cell phone to expose a trap set up for him, and it's almost exciting. Almost. This is followed by Manny getting gunned down while driving. No idea why he was driving suddenly, but okay. The music tells us we're supposed to be sad. It doesn't really work. Johnny uses the phone booth again. The phone booth is kind of a recurring thing in this movie. This time calling Wilmer Valderrama's character, a fence he's worked with before, who hangs up on him 3 times before finally taking the call. I can't tell if this is failed humor or mere padding. I suppose it could be both. I am Okay, maybe it's just general stress from the whole shelter-in-place thing, which is definitely going to still be in effect when this episode goes up. But I am honestly having a lot of trouble staying invested in this movie. Though really a lot of it has to do with the movie itself, because it's trying to have the tone of an action movie and a character piece about an aging criminal at the same time. And while that could work, I mean, there were elements of both in The Godfather, though that was just one aspect of it, it isn't working in this particular film. I mean, this movie has three things I generally like in it. Val Kilmer, Mark Helgenberger, and a heist. And we are more than a fourth of the way through this thing, and I just don't care. I mean, the whole emotional scene where Johnny calls his daughter again and asks to speak to his grandson carried so little weight with me. I spent the entire time trying to remember where I'd seen the actress playing his daughter before. By the way, she was the waitress in the first Avengers movie that Captain America saves. She has a few extra lines in the deleted scenes. But, yeah, man, this has me thinking I'd rather be watching Avengers right now. Heck, honestly, even though I ended up softening my opinion on this movie a little later, I'd probably still be rather watching Avengers Age of Ultron right now. Yeah, look, I don't hate Age of Ultron, but come on, it's the weakest of the Avengers movies, let's be honest here. Getting back to Columbus Day, there's a phone sex scene now. Okay, whatever. Still bored. Even when it devolves into an argument, which, I mean, hey, at least that means it didn't go on forever. There's another flashback, half of which repeats the end of the previous flashback, even though it only lasts like a minute and a half. That's an odd editing choice there. There's the threat of something actually exciting happening when a couple of guys who look like they might be hitmen show up at the park. The music certainly wants me to think this is exciting, but it doesn't work. That's actually a pretty common thread for this movie, the music not quite conveying what it's trying to. Oh, wait, did I phrase that well enough? Screw it. So the kid from earlier is still around, but he's gotten even more annoying, and pretty quickly. The kid manages to get a hold of Johnny's gun briefly, leading to another scene that's almost exciting. That's kind of a running theme with this movie. But just ends with Johnny getting it back, hurting the kid's arm in the process, and the kid running away crying, "You're mean, and it's about as eye-rolling as it sounds. This leads to another flashback to the heist, but at this point I'd completely checked out of the movie. I certainly didn't care what was in the damn case, and, that proved to be relevant. As it turns out, the writer basically just ripped off Pulp Fiction, and we never actually learned what's in it. Okay, I don't think Pulp Fiction was ever the first movie to do that kind of thing either, but whatever. Yeah, it may surprise you how many times I've said this episode already that I softened my opinion on the movie as I had more time to think about it, because I just spent about 3 pages of my script talking about how boring it was. But, yeah, the halfway point is actually where things for the movie start to turn around, where my opinion of the movie starts to become somewhat more positive. For starters, during the title drop sequence, someone mentions that it's Columbus Day, and the name of the movie is Columbus Day. It does lead to a really genuine laugh when Max, played by Wilmer Valderrama, gets Johnny to say, "Fuck Columbus." I'm with you there, movie. Fuck that guy. That is a good scene. It's my favorite scene in the movie. I'm just going to go ahead and say it right now. It has nothing to do with the main plot, but it is funny and it is true, so it wins. The kid comes back, which you probably expected. The paddle boat scene happens, and I say the paddle boat scene as if you already know what I'm talking about, because if you've been watching the video, instead of just playing this in the background, you've probably seen a screen cap of that scene once or twice by now. There's a thing with the girlfriend and the police, yada yada, heart-to-heart with the daughter on the phone, that... okay, I wrote in the script that it didn't work at all, and, that was a bit unfair. It's not super effective, but, the actors were trying, so I'll give them that. But the problem I still have with it, though, is the overly saccharine music and the uneven split screen. I think, honestly, the reason I was so harsh on it here was just because of how boring, the previous hour of the movie was up to it. See, yeah, while my opinion has softened, I can't let go of the fact that the first half of the movie, first hour of the movie, really, is kind of boring. Of the scenes in this movie I can honestly say I liked, maybe 2 of them are in the first half. Maybe. But yeah, my point about the overly saccharine music here, it's like, I'm a bit of a sap. I cry at movies all the time, but this one, it didn't really affect me in the way that it was clearly trying to. And that just goes to show how much it fails, because, again, total softy up in here. But we're gonna go past this a little bit here. Oh, wow, I didn't realize how much of this I skipped over. I should probably get into the habit of rereading my scripts before recording the episode. But, yeah, I mean, basically, the last act is it's Johnny basically nagging his ex into getting back together with him. That's not great. He manages to get the money for his heist while setting up the guy he originally stole from to get taken down by the cops, which is a mildly interesting sequence. There's a moment where, Johnny gets shot and it looks like he might not make it, but I don't know. I was pretty sure he was going to, and I was right. So, you know what, let's just go ahead and call it an episode since... Okay, I was apparently, according to what I was writing down, I was really tired during the last act of the film, which I guess explains why I didn't write that much down about it. I'm sorry. Wow, this episode is a total mess. I think I'm going to blame it all on the shelter-in-place order. It's left me not feeling so great this past month. So, random thoughts I had while watching the movie. Well, the first thing I wrote down, and I can tell even without the context that I wrote this during the first half of the movie, I was honestly too bored most of the time to have thoughts about the movie. Considering how much of this movie is set in Echo Park, they might as well have named the movie that. Mark Helgenberger spends the majority of her screen time sitting behind a desk. Nice work if you can get it, I guess. Same with Wilmer Valderrama, getting to do all of his scenes in one house, and many of those in a robe. The part where Johnny uses his assumption that the police are listening in to his call to his girlfriend when he breaks up with her to his advantage was actually kind of clever. Yeah, I didn't mention that through the recap. He does dump the girlfriend before getting back with his ex-wife. This isn't that kind of movie. Because he can be a thief who nearly murders someone, but, God forbid he be polyamorous. The exchange between Johnny and Espinosa, that's the guy he'd stolen from at the start of the movie and who he was getting the money from to return the stolen merchandise and all that. This was clearly trying to be like the big Pacino-De Niro scene in Heat, which Val Kilmer was also in, funnily enough, but it doesn't work. There are many great examples of the protagonist and the antagonist having a tense conversation, but this ain't one of them. Final verdict. I'm going to be honest with you, folks. I was not able to watch this movie in one sitting. Now, for every film I cover on this show, with the exception of the Baywatch movie where I didn't bother taking notes, I will pause to write things down. This is not what I did for Columbus Day. Well, I did that too. But at least twice, I didn't simply pause. I closed Windows Media Player and walked away to do other stuff, sometimes for more than an hour. That is how little investment this movie managed to get out of me while I was watching it. Now, as I've been saying, I've softened my opinion on the movie since writing this script. And I realize now that I think a lot of that honestly has to do with things completely out of this movie's control. It's not the movie's fault that I still have to go to work during a pandemic. It's not the movie's fault that I can't really go out for walks. It's not the movie's fault I gotta wear a mask every time I leave the house. I was taking out my stress on the movie, and the fact that the movie does have flaws, the boring first half, the protagonist reuniting with his ex basically through negging, all that, yeah, it's just, I got nothing to go with after that, honestly. Columbus Day is a meh movie at the end of the day, really. And what good about it there is, like 98% of the good is contained in the second half. So, yeah, I still can't really recommend this to anyone, though if you do want to watch it, I would recommend trying to watch it for free, because let's not forget, Kevin Spacey is still one of the producers on this thing. And, yeah, you heard the part about, several of his accusers just turning up dead, right? Yeah, that's... oof. That is the worst aspect of this movie, and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything that's on screen. So, yeah. Season 4, Episode 4 is over. Tune in next time for this season wrap-up episode. Hopefully that episode will be more coherent.